one, go.
Hello, everyone. So, hey, wave to mommy and daddy. Thanks for you for joining us all here. We don't have a great idea who's out there, but I'm enjoying seeing everyone pop up in the chat. So if I haven't said hi by name, hello, it's great to see you. So Miguel is joining us from, where are you sitting? Is this the home office?
I'm in my basement.
Yeah.
This is like King of Comedy, and I'm Rupert Pupkin doing my my imitations of all the celebrities. It's really cold actually, so I don't actually do that much work here. But it's the nicest backdrop in my house.
World headquarters, we call it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I will say, everyone, if you would like to have a drink, we have brought drinks. We're going to chill out and be a little casual and hear what how he wrote this book, how he came around writing this story, and he's going to share. He's going to dish. I don't know if we're going to get a visit from the rest of the family, but we'll at least hear the inside story. The first thing I did want to ask you, let me back up for a minute. We, who are your friends, have, sort of watched this saga, sometimes from up close, sometimes from a little further. And, we saw the ups and downs, we saw what it put you guys through, and it was really unbelievable what you had to bear, as you say, more than you can handle. And I think it's hard to imagine what that's like unless you're in that position. And even having sort of heard the commentary and the insights over the years, I found this book to be a page turner. Yes, I'm pimping the book because it's amazing. It's a really fantastic book if you haven't read it. But I learned something, every page almost, about not just about medicine, but about the family. I mean, it was just really gripping. And I was, as a journalist and a writer myself, I was just really struck by, was it a hard decision to bear yourself or to go recap what had to be such a painful time in your life?
Yeah. So, well, first of all, hi everybody, and thanks for joining. I'm kind of blown away by the number of people who have kind of tuned in, who have plenty of better things to do, I'm sure. How did this happen? Well, first of all, obviously the diagnosis and the crisis happened, and then a lot of people who have extended medical experiences, extended medical interventions, know that there's always lots of downtime, right? A lot of these procedures take a long time, and certainly the body takes its own sweet time to heal. So in the course of this, like many people do, I was writing Facebook posts, and some of my friends who read them, including some people who are on this chat, kind of encouraged me to turn it into a book. And of course, that's something nice to say. And I went back and forth on it a number of times. And that's Felicia. She's just walking down here. She's probably going to join us a little bit later. It took me a long time, not just to write the proposal, but to get it into a phase where I felt comfortable doing it. But ultimately, I felt that it's something that I had to do. And also, I will say this: if you spend years as a journalist, you ultimately are kind of picking over other people's issues and other people's problems and other people's crises and other people's pain. And I was curious to see if I would have the integrity and the kind of focus and the honesty to be able to apply those same kind of critical facilities to myself and my own shortcomings. But more broadly, I mean, I don't think I'm that interesting. But I do think the experience was really interesting. Yes. No, please. No more compliments. No more compliments. But I do think the experience was fascinating. The experience was unlike anything I'd ever been through before. And I think a lot of journalists have these moments when they're wherever, in a war zone or in a trial or at a riot or at a political event, where they think, wow, this is something worth documenting. Not just in the, hey, let's take a selfie kind of sense, but this is actually a story and I happen to be a part of it. And, let's not let it just kind of drift into memory.
Yeah, I mean, was it, turning the camera on yourself, as it were? I mean, I don't know, for those who who don't know, I mean, your work, your professional work before this book is really about covering crime and human misery.
Mm-hmm.
And, there's victims galore. I don't, not, I don't say this, this is in a bad way, but we're used to dealing with people in the throes of crisis. And
Right.
I'm wondering if you gained any insights or, what your reflections were, when the tables were turned.
Yeah. So the insight was that living it, or observing it secondhand actually doesn't give one necessarily any insight on how to handle it when it's your turn. It's a much different thing. And there's a comment here that we should say a little bit about what the diagnosis was, which I'm happy to do. But I would just say that, yeah, from a journalistic perspective, I also really got an appreciation for the helplessness that people who trust us with their stories experience. Somebody calls you and says, "Oh, I want to talk to you about the most traumatic experience of your life," and they show up and they write things down or they videotape you and then they go away, and you basically have no control over how the story is presented. That's an extraordinary amount of trust you're putting in essentially a stranger, an extraordinary degree of helplessness. And I was actually the one writing the story. I had total control over it. And I still felt completely helpless and kind of at the mercy of a reader's perceptions.
Yeah. There's a good point. Kim made a good point. Asking about the diagnosis, and I have no idea how many people out there have read the book or know the basic story already. But Miguel, you want to give the basic recap? I mean, what's your family story?
Right. So I want to apologize to everybody in advance because I've been asked this enough that I feel like when I give the response, it's like putting on Steely Dan's greatest hits, and we're just kind of I'm performing it. But this is what happened. In 2012, we were blessed. My wife Felicia and I were blessed with a second child named Sebastian, and we just thought it was wonderful, and we thought everything was going to be great in our lives because, frankly, everything had been great in our lives up to that point. But then at age 2 months, he started getting this series of very strange infections that required hospitalizations, minor surgeries, of course, medications. And that sent us on what is kind of officially known in the rare disease community as a diagnostic odyssey that culminated ultimately when months down the road, when Felicia, to her great credit, was perspicacious and insistent enough to take us, our son, I should say, to an immunologist who herself kind of engaged in this medical detective work, which is really fascinating, actually, to kind of tweeze out from a constellation of what could be considered rather normal symptoms or common symptoms that, in fact, no, it wasn't just bad luck. He wasn't just getting something. He indeed had a very rare and historically very lethal immune deficiency that made his body unable to fight off a handful of very common bacteria and fungal infections.
Yeah. And of course, in the rest of the book, no spoilers here. Well, a few spoilers. So they end up going down, spending about a year down at Duke Medical Center and getting a bone marrow transplant for Sebastian, which was, quite the ordeal. But I can give you the spoiler alert. It's got a glorious, uplifting ending.
Yeah,
but it's
like the Titanic, except the boat doesn't sink.
And I'm a medical journalist myself. I cover science and medicine, and I have to say, I thought your perspective on this was fantastic. I mean, you really sort of brought a fresh eye to some really, without making this a nerd out session. I mean, the person, your own experience was at the forefront, but I think you brought out the kind of questions and details that it was like you felt like this is what it's like to be in that chair and get that kind of bad news, and the kind of the shock that goes over you. But you're a curious person, and you sort of had the right follow-up questions to ask. So I was curious about your, were you aware of how little you knew going in? I mean, going into the hospital the first time. I don't mean writing the book.
Right. No, I mean, largely because, again, I mean, I can't say this enough. We had both, our entire family had been extraordinarily blessed on the medical front, among many other fronts. So, I can't remember the last time I'd been in the hospital, or any of us really, other than to give birth to healthy children. So when you go in there and the news is bad, or perhaps the news is really bad, or even worse in some situations, there is no news. You've got a kind of parade of highly qualified and compassionate specialists who have no idea what's going on, and can't do anything other than continue to perform a series of tests, is profoundly unnerving and unmooring in a lot of ways. And then again, the thing that really kind of hit home is the radical change in your kind of social status, for lack of a better term. In the outside world, what we called healthy world, we were people who had some degree of status, some degree of control over our lives, and in the little microcosm of our workplaces, had some sort of authority, had some degree of control over things. We were somebodies. But once you go into a hospital, even if, and not to say that they treat you like a prisoner, or they treat you like an untouchable, but you don't have any control, right? You don't know anything.
Hospital world.
Yeah, you're in hospital world. And the entire physical environment changes, time changes, again, your status changes. It takes a lot of getting used to. It's extraordinarily disruptive.
What was the moment that you went from this is pretty bad to whoa, this is real bad?
Yeah, it was when we well, we got the diagnosis. I was at work. There was this test that we thought was kind of over and done with, and then the immunologist called us back and said, actually, no, the test came back with a bad result. And then I went home and I did the dumbest thing you can ever do. I don't like putting myself in giving unsolicited advice, but if you do ever catch a strange diagnosis, I would strongly advise people not to Google it that night, because you get inundated with, of course, a flood of, really impenetrable medical studies, or really depressing statistics, a terrifying Wikipedia page, all sorts of horrific personal anecdotes. So that was terrifying. And then the next morning when we went to, kind of get told the full rundown by the immunologist and her assistant, when it really sank in that this was not going to go away. This was not a problem that could be fixed. There was no pill you could take. There was no kind of dietary change you can make, especially with immune conditions. Sometimes people want to say or easily confuse immune deficiencies with autoimmune conditions, which is a related but really different
thing. Kind of the opposite.
Yeah, exactly. And then it kind of really hit that actually, no, the entire trajectory of our lives as we understood them was going to be radically different for the foreseeable future. In the book, I make a analogy, and obviously, like any analogy, it has its imperfections. But when I was at ABC, we did a fair number of stories about cruise ship mishaps, and one of the stories that we ran and reran quite a bit was about a guy who fell off a cruise ship and found himself in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico, seeing I think it was I want to say the Princess of the Seas steaming over the horizon. And that's the closest I can come to describing what it feels like to have basically your entire life radically altered to a new situation where you have no bearings, no way to get home, and no real understanding of how you got there in the first place.
I'm going to say a little tip here. If it's a little easier for us to keep track of questions if you hit the ask a question button. We'll do our best to hit them all. We do have one question who is asking what your daughter knew about this. Like, how did she come into the fold?
Right. So
she's older, I should say. She's a few years older.
Yeah. So if there's anybody on the chat who's a stranger to us or our story or the book, yeah, we were very fortunate. We still are very fortunate to have an older daughter, Lydia, who was 4 years older, and in the book, and at that time, she was just at this precious golden age where she was just this fire hose of positivity and love and understanding. And, so she's 4 years older. Sebastian was diagnosed when he was about 5 months. So in this time, right, he became a number of things for her. In addition to a baby brother, she was kind of, something that she could love, something she could help care for. And frankly, she kind of extended that to the rest of the family, because she was perspicacious enough to know that the rest of us kind of needed that support, those little boosts, that those rays of sunshine and optimism that, frankly, only a child can provide in that kind of unqualified capacity.
Yeah. I remember it's funny how you remember these things from the outside. I remember the sort of, the saga playing out in bits and pieces, and you were flying here and you're flying there and you're going to, and I'm embarrassed in hindsight that I feel like I should have known like a little more like the thread of what was going on. Instead, to me, it was sort of absorbing this as there's just still in the middle of this muddle. And I'm wondering if it felt that way to you, or if you felt like we're going to check these transplant centers and like here's the path, because in the book it's got a linearity to it. And I'm wondering if you felt that at the time, or if it was really just, or what are the moments that stand out for you, or the moments of clarity in that process? Because
right. Well, I think Felicia would probably give a more concise and, frankly, a more admirable answer. I think Felicia knew right away that her life, was kind of instantly refocused on being the primary caregiver for Sebastian, and it was her job to do the research, to find the best way to move forward with him, ultimately to find the best transplant center and to make that happen. I was the one who, kind of indulged in denial, who indulged in stoicism, who indulged in workaholism, and who, frankly, I'm not proud to say this, but I'm honest enough to write about it, made things worse a lot of the time, and even down to the fundamental decision about whether or not to try to live with the disease, which a lot of people do, and there's many all sorts of wonderful advances taking place on the pharmaceutical side and the therapeutic side for people who can often live with the disease, or opting for this one radical, risky, arduous, profoundly disruptive medical procedure of the stem cell transplant. And so I was, vacillating back and forth, a classic approach avoidance conflict that kind of jammed us up in a lot of ways. And ultimately, it was only when we realized that trying to live with the disease, after years of trying to live with the disease, both Sebastian's health and our marriage and the whole domestic situation was deteriorating to the point where we had to go for this. Otherwise, one disaster, if not more, was going to befall us.
Yeah, and first, just tell people like a little bit of what you did. You guys went to some lengths. You were really interviewing, the crack teams at several, pretty high-end medical centers.
Yeah, well, the first true moment when we realized we weren't just, dealing with a disease you've heard of. Now, plenty of diseases you've heard of are obviously really traumatic and stressful and ordeals of their own. I'm thinking of leukemia, right? Leukemia is a very serious disease. I don't mean to make light of leukemia. But if you do get diagnosed with leukemia, there's plenty of people who can give you sound advice about it, and then you can make a decision about what to do. With a rare disease, in this age of big data we live in, you suffer from a problem of small data. There aren't a lot of patients. There aren't a lot of specialists. There certainly aren't a lot of treatments. There's not a lot of market demand for breakthrough medications. So what you end up doing in our case, and in many people's cases, you go to the one place that specializes and devotes rather impressive resources to exotic rare diseases, and that was the NIH, the National Institute of Health, which of course is on everybody's lips these days because of the COVID crisis and Dr. Fauci. And we went there in January of 2013, and that was a trip.
Yeah, and they have a real interesting deal. I'm wondering if you turn yourself into a lab rat, and in exchange, you get a pretty good deal.
Yeah. If only kind of healthcare choices were that simple, for other folks. But yes, you basically get unlimited access to, the best cutting edge healthcare in the world to the degree that they're able to provide it in exchange for your data, your specimens, your blood, your urine, your poop, your skin, because that's what they need in order to be able to kind of amass the biggest data set they can to understand the phenotype of these rare genetic disorders and to try to advance their understanding of this rare disease. Each patient is, I think I say in the book that, for an immunologist to find a CGD patient is like a marine biologist finding a giant squid or something. That it's a really valuable specimen. And so as long as you're willing to play along, that's the deal.
Yeah. And, you were ultimately treated at Duke and not NIH, but, they were still played a very important role in, guiding you and consulting later. I think a lot of people are not familiar with the fact that NIH actually has a hospital on the grounds, that they actually have a medical center right there. It's not just a research place.
Oh, yeah.
It's quite an experience going in there. I've had the experience going in, not as a patient, just with a film crew, and it's quite a, it's really something else.
Yeah, well, post 9/11, NIH, because in addition to providing this wonderful healthcare, they do have some biological agents there that they study, including smallpox, including at least at one point they had some anthrax there. Anyway, the point is, it is considered a high value target for the sensitivities relating to biological and chemical warfare. Thus and so, when you go to the grounds, it is now post 9/11 a fully militarized campus, and you have to get, I don't want to say strip search, that's an exaggeration, but you have to open all your bags, you have to have your car sniffed by a dog, you have to answer all the questions. You're it's like I think in the book I say it's like boarding an El Al flight to Tel Aviv. It's a high security operation. And that's not what you normally think of when you're taking your baby to a doctor's visit. Felicia said it was like walking into the last reel of E.T., where this army of hazmat suits is going to come seize your child and proceed with a battery of tests that will go on forever. But I do want to say that it's all necessary, worthwhile, and highly noble enterprise for the advancement of medical science. People, I think, oftentimes, and I'm going to sound preachy here, but bear with me, take a lot of things for granted. They take their technology for granted, and they certainly take medical breakthroughs for granted. But, in order for that pill to arrive and to be safe and effective, a lot of patients had to suffer. In the case of, breakthrough therapies like stem cell transplant, a lot of patients died. And it's important for me, at least, to be kind of continually grateful for the sacrifices that those people made, so that we can kind of stand at the top of the mountain that they built.
Yeah, with all diseases, it's especially notable in the rare diseases. It really is trial and error. And with the rare diseases, they don't have that many cracks at it, so progress takes longer. But each time is really a learning experience, and you don't know till later where you fall on that curve of the learning. You hope they figured it out by the time you show up.
Sure.
Again, if you have a question, hit the question button. We do have a couple in there. One person asked, when you talk about giving samples and turning yourself into a guinea pig, was it just Sebastian, or did you and Felicia and Lydia all have to sign on too?
To a certain degree, yeah, because when we did go to to Duke to engage in the transplant, which I hope we get to talk about a little bit, they need to know all sorts of things about the patient, just to make sure that the patient is healthy enough to go into transplant to begin with. But also they need to know all sorts of things about our blood and our blood types, to see if we can be platelet donors, to see if we can give hemoglobin. There's all sorts of things that we might need to do. Also, because Sebastian's condition was a monogenetic mutation on the X chromosome, okay? With a male child, obviously, he gets the Y chromosome from me and the X chromosome for his mother. They were very interested, and they continue to be very interested in the genetic profiles and the phenotypes of the carriers. And one of the great things that Felicia is doing is now kind of championing and advocating for both the importance of the study and the need for a lot of the carriers to get their own kind of specialized, customized form of treatment, because even though they don't have the full-blown disease, they can have a lot of the symptoms that can really inhibit the quality of life. So yes, so Felicia, her mom, who might be the world's oldest living CGD carrier, they're all highly valued objects of study.
Well, we will skip ahead because I think the story really, obviously hits its dramatic high point. You guys, you go for it. This is to get a bone marrow transplant was not. I know it was not an easy decision. There's, even though it's the only cure out there, it's high stakes. It is actually a potential cure, but it can go horribly wrong very easily. I can say that now. And it's funny. I remember really well. I don't know if it was the night before, but within the couple days before you went down there, sitting around and having a drink with you in New York with a couple of our friends. And I believe that was you heading down to Duke for the first time, or maybe it was one of the second time going down there to really do business. And I really remember that sense of quiet sitting in that room. And you were plunged. You went down the chute. You went into hospital world. And I'm curious, that it's very vivid. And I just wonder if you could tell a little bit about, you go to Durham, they do these transplants. That's what they do. That's why you chose it. And, you are all of a sudden, you're not quite so rare. There really is a community of people making this pilgrimage. And I'm wondering if, what kind of support did you feel from those people? What was it like to all of a sudden be surrounded by people in the same dire situation?
Yeah. So, Silicon Valley is to high tech, or New York is to high finance, or, Boston is to higher education. To a certain degree, the same concentration of excellence and specialization applies to medical conditions at Duke, particularly when it comes to pediatric bone marrow transplantation. And so, yes, we went from being, the kind of the outsiders to being the ultimate insiders, and in this community of patients. It's one of those places, believe it or not, if people can remember, there was a time when not everybody walked around with a mask, and back in those, back in the olden days of 2016, you would walk around the Duke campus and even downtown Durham, and you'd see regularly people with the surgical masks on and the hats, and they were transplant patients in some degree of their pre or post transplant phase. And so obviously that, and accompanied with all the massive, just wonderfully touching, impressive infrastructure that they've built around there, was great. It was also great, I have to say, to just say, okay, we're handing the kid over to the doctor now, and he's theirs, and we've made our decision, and the roller coaster has left the loading dock, and now this is what we're doing. After years of kind of back and forth and debating it, and as I said, the ambivalence about the whole thing, both by kind of conscious decision and necessity, we were there, we were doing it, and it was wonderful. And I have to say that it wasn't just the doctor's compassion, and it wasn't just their skill that impressed me. It was their kind of buccaneering spirit. People don't think of doctors necessarily as, I don't know, high risk people, like venture capitalists or skydivers or rock stars. But to a certain degree, these doctors were. These are the people who are willing to rock and roll and go balls to the wall if they think they can save a patient's life, trying some experimental procedure, some frankly dangerous procedure on a patient that is, in other parts of the world, and here I'm thinking of Europe, because this is what a comparison one of the doctors made for me. In Europe, a patient who's had a couple, relapses or failed transplant, they get sent to hospice. It's like, we've done what we can for you, God bless. In the States, they're sending these people into transplant. They are, trying the most radical and innovative cutting edge therapies, even if those therapies themselves might lead to death.
Yeah. And I think it'd be kind of nice, there was you just found, I know we've talked a lot about the reporting side of this, but in the realm of the human spirit, you found support from quarters, expected and unexpected. I think there was really an outpouring of people who were around you at that time, from old friends, from just the people you bumped into. It was, I mean, I don't know, it was really touching, honestly, to read about it. I mean, it sort of makes you, it's one of those, if you find yourself in this situation, you hope to find friends like that.
Yeah, I mean, well, let's just admit it, right? The world can be depressing, and people can disappoint you, and cynicism and alienation are always there for you. You disappoint yourself. I've certainly disappointed myself several times. So when you see and witness and benefit from these ongoing moments of spontaneous altruism, or even spontaneous super altruism, people who I had at best, if not complete strangers, then a highly attenuated relationship, or a relationship that I hadn't tended to for decades, suddenly rearranging their lives to do literally anything they can for you. People always say, if there's anything I can do, and you just kind of nod and say, of course. But actually, some people really mean that, and they want to do anything they can do, even if it's something as pedestrian as babysitting your daughter, or buying you a bag of groceries, or helping you find a car seat. Some of these things that frankly I didn't think I deserved, and so that's one of those things that is really uplifting and touching, and for me highly instructive. I certainly would like to be more like that myself on a daily basis.
Yeah. Do you have any advice for people out here who, should they find a friend in a similar, trying position? What kind of things really touched you, and what kind of things, rightly or wrongly, no naming names, kind of were like, don't do that.
Well, I mentioned, don't Google things. I mean, I would say, to a certain degree, the book illuminates, maybe despite itself, I think, the difference between how men and women might handle things like this. Okay. Not to kind of superimpose stereotypical gender roles on everybody out there, but certainly in our case, I think, Felicia, as I mentioned, had a very fluid transition to being a caregiver and being an advocate, and kind of devoting her life to this. Even at sacrificing what was at the time an extraordinarily high growth, high potential career, running her own kind of boutique PR agency, and I couldn't really cope with it. I didn't want to do this. I didn't want to be that guy. I didn't want to be that family. I was angry. I was certainly angry that, of all things, an innocent child was subjected to this kind of unfairness. And then, of course, that just kind of radiated out, because I was tied to the situation too, and I thought it was just hideously unfair that I or anyone else would have to deal with this. But it happens all the time. So, as I mentioned earlier, I've tried a number of rather pathetically predictable modalities of coping, including denial, stoicism, and workaholism. And then it was only, like I said, when things were really dangling by a string, both domestically and medically, that I kind of decided I needed to at least attempt to be a real grown-up, and to take on the responsibility, not just for kind of providing for the family materially, or giving my kid his medicine, but dealing with my own baggage, my own flaws, my own imperfections, that a situation like this just basically breaks open and makes you confront with sober senses. I mean, ultimately, look, if there's a lesson there, it's that, to the degree that we have functioning immune systems for bodily pathogens, it really behooves one to try to also construct an immune system for the mind, an immune system that is able to give you some defense for the continuous onslaught of pollutants and pathogens that can mess with your mind. Because frankly, as we all know, life keeps coming at you, man. I mean, you don't just get to check out.
Yeah. And I guess that's kind of one of the funny about, talk about checking out. I mean, that's one of the things that you wrote about very eloquently, was going into the hospital in a way that simplifies life. And you talked about a lot coming out. I mean, it's sort of like, as difficult as that time was, it, it narrowed your focus.
Right.
Simplified is what's right in front of you. And I think you had some, interesting examples where that really came to the front, where you were in crisis, but you put your newfound immunology into practice.
Sure. I mean, the downside of being in a pediatric bone marrow transplant unit is that you're hermetically sealed. You're essentially in a, use whatever imagery you want.
You are really sealed. I mean,
huh?
talk about. I mean, what's the checklist down there? I mean, to go into, just to go through the doors to get in there. And
Yeah.
not for
So some of these
against terrorists, but
yeah, right. It's like going to a supermax prison. You have to, go in the elevator. Some of these procedures are not going to be familiar to everybody who's dealt with, COVID world, social distancing.
they're sadly too familiar now.
Yeah,
Some of them.
but it goes everything from making sure you don't press an elevator button with your finger. Use your knuckle. Entering kind of a Sally Port antechamber where you have to scrub down, put on booties and a mask and a hairnet, making sure, of course, that you avoid anybody who's sick, and then going into this tiny room with its own HVAC system, a HEPA filtered HVAC system, and caring for this tiny, precious, fragile little child whose life is dangling by a string because of the treatment itself, right? The treatment itself is what brings patient. You basically annihilate the existing immune system, transplant, if you're lucky, the donor cells that hopefully engraft, and then try to build that immune system back up from zero, and not suffer any of the countless post-transplant complications that can arise.
I know you in the end, I think Sebastian, once he went through, you got to come and go a bit, but Sebastian, once he went through those doors, I think you said he was there for 8 months. Is that right?
He was in, hi, Ellie, by the way, one of our friends just joined. He was in North Carolina for 8 months. He was in the unit itself for 2 months, and then he had to go back ever so slightly for a little period after that. But yes, it was basically, I think, a total of 50 days, maybe 49 days.
Is that kind of ballpark what most of the other families there were doing?
Yeah, I mean, I have to say this. We had it easy compared to many of the families there, both in terms of the process and in terms of the final outcome. So many families had it so much worse. And that's one of the things that I really wanted to do in the book, is include the testimonies and the experiences and the observations of families who we met along the way, who were wonderful, and frankly, many of whom had to suffer orders of magnitude more than we did.
Well, tell everyone a little bit about what the other families were like. Who are they from? You talked a little bit of like a model UN feel, but I mean, these are people from, we talk about COVID as the leveler, which it is not, but these kind of bolt from the blue diseases really can hit anyone. And I mean, it seems like who was there? Who are your neighbors? In the places where you stayed and in the hallway at the hospital.
Sure. So you're absolutely right. As a function of the fact that Duke, for many families, is the kind of medical option of last resort, it draws, and frankly, there's plenty of other medical centers, excellent in their own right, who simply won't treat some of these patients because they just don't have the experience, or they don't have the protocol, or they don't have the track record that they're comfortable treating the patient. So patients come from all over the world, and we had, I have to remember whose name I used and whose name I anonymized in the book, but there was a family from Saudi Arabia. There was a family, a single mother from Virginia. There was, of course, I would say they have a slight overrepresentation of people from the South. There was almost kind of a Star Trek-y kind of couple from Boston who were the science people who were both worked in labs. And then there was a really wonderful family. It was a military family, and their daughter this is embarrassing. I forget exactly what rare condition they have. I mean, these are diseases that I'd never heard of, and are relatively easy to forget. But their daughter had some terrible condition, and it had not been going well for them. And even though, as I said, the Duke doctors, these adventuring, buccaneering rock and rollers, they sent her home, saying we've done all we can. The dad was a fighter pilot on I want to say the USS Theodore Roosevelt. And his wife is this wonderful woman. Anyway, so they sent her home, and we were like, "Oh, she's not going to make it," which is a very serious thing. But then months later, we find that she's like being featured on Inside Edition. She's being, she's in People Magazine because she's had one of these miraculous recoveries that just tell you that. But she's not fully healed. I don't want to overstate that. But she's alive 5 years later, and which is not what they predicted. So that gives you a sense of that even though we have these wonderful doctors and all these technical breakthroughs and all this amazing technology and pharmacology and knowledge, there's still so much that we don't know. There's still that kind of step of faith that you have to take at a certain point where the technology merges or doesn't, or the technology confronts the biology and it either harmonizes or it doesn't.
But there's a lot of detail in the book about these other families. Not in depth, but you got to know these people's stories. I'm a little curious about the process for that. I mean, was this something that you picked up as you were there, all the in the hallway down by the water cooler, or did you do a lot of interviewing afterwards? And I mean, that's obviously a delicate topic. I mean, talk about it a little bit.
Well, what made it a little bit awkward was that while I was there, I was still, trying to work. I was working full time, and also you have to social distance big time, right? If you've got kids that are immunocompromised to that degree, and so there was a lot of waving and a lot of hi hellos and some communal bonding, but I wasn't totally engrossed, and we were all kind of in our own little pods, our own little worlds. So afterwards, I had to call, and they knew who I was, and I knew who they were, and I wanted to ask them honestly to share their stories, and they did. And the one thing that was
most people said yes.
Everybody said yes. I think, but my pitch. I mean, I frankly, I tried to talk some people out of sharing their stories because what I wanted to do with the book was explore the fact that when families traditionally get these kind of diagnoses, there's this stereotypical kind of Hollywood, Lorenzo's oil mythology that they suddenly can tap into this infinite well of either love or compassion or patience, sometimes a deep well of capital to either care for the child or to cure the child or to do any of these heroic things. And the truth of the matter is that a lot of parents who get hit with this stuff don't act like heroes, because when you're put under tremendous stress, you don't necessarily automatically bring your A game. And I, for one, am exhibit A in that regard. So I wanted to talk to them about how this messed with their marriages. I wanted to talk with them about their anger. I wanted to talk to them about, their sorrow, their desperation, the ugly stuff. And basically the pitch was, I want to try to paint a portrait that's warts and all. The advantage, though, of painting a portrait that's warts and all is that you realize that it's not just the warts that matter, it's the and all that also matters. And I think they resonated to that to a certain degree.
Mm-hmm. I mean, in some cases, you were calling people whose children had died, who didn't make it out.
Absolutely.
Or who are still waiting, I think, in some cases.
Yeah, or who, frankly, know that there's, if not 100% chance, there's a 90% chance that their child will die within the next 5 to 10 years.
For those who don't know, how's Sebastian doing?
Well, I can report on that because just coincidentally, we had a post-transplant appointment today at his post-transplant facility, MSK, here in New York. And, the thing they have to watch out for constantly is the fact that because the treatment involved a rather severe, relatively massive dose of a trio of chemotherapy drugs, he's going to be at risk for organ damage for the rest of his life. So we have these frequent check-ins, and he's doing great. He's, the growth chart, which was kind of hovering, kind of flatlining, bottom feeding for a while, is now not just growing, but accelerating. He's doing very well. I cannot say, I don't have the words to express my gratitude for that. Again, the book touches a bit on issues of faith and God and kind of the points of friction, if you will, that Felicia and I had as that came up. And to the degree that one can define God's grace as the granting of a gift that one doesn't deserve, I would be the first to say that I have received God's grace.
And that was, I mean, it was interesting. I mean, you certainly wrote about this quite a bit, and I've talked to Felicia quite a bit about this. I mean, but there's a lot of God in the unit. I mean, the nurses, the doctors. I mean, this is, I mean, it's a little different from living up here in the Boston medical community, I will say.
Yeah. It's one of those things where I think the nurses there, look, the nurses in particular, who I'm not sure, I've tried to write about and give them their fair share. I don't think enough can be said about them. But, if you're talking about a nurse on a pediatric transplant unit, you're talking usually about a person, often a woman, not always, who has made a conscious decision not to, say, be in an ER where, for lack of, a more elegant comparison, it's a conveyor belt, right? You don't have a lot of bonding or long-term interaction with a patient. They've chosen not to do that and instead chosen to be in a long-term unit where they're going to have daily contact with their patients, bond with them emotionally, to the point where they have to go into the supply closet and cry their eyes out when things turn south, as they sometimes do, and really give of themselves because they want to have those relationships. They're choosing to have those relationships with their patients.
And it was one of those striking details. I mean, I hadn't really thought about this, but obviously there's this very intense relationship for whatever it is, 6 or 8 weeks that you're in the unit or however long it is, and then people go and they might write sometime, they might not, and like they're willing to do that, put themselves out for someone they're never going to see again. And
right.
Basically, I think someone told you, if I don't hear from them, I know that's good news.
Yeah. Well, they have this immense reserve of emotional capital, but it's still finite. And so, for them, in order to function, part of them has to be able to kind of say goodbye and let the patient go out the door. And if the patient doesn't come back, that means that's a win. That's a success. And then they will have hopefully enough left in the tank to kind of turn their attention to the next one that's coming in.
Yeah.
But yeah, to return to your question about God, yeah, so that manifests because there's this immense bond, and if they're invited to kind of bring their faith into the conversation, then a lot of those nurses who are very faithful people will do so. I would not say that they're preachy. I would not say that it's off-putting, but it is something that is kind of easily available for people who want it.
Yeah. Anyone, a reminder, especially people who are popping in here, if you have a question, if you hit that, there's an ask a question button down here. It's the easiest way to keep track of them.
It's ask a question time.
There is one question Kim asked was kind of what was Sebastian's awareness, or at least his ability to communicate? And I know that was actually an important medical issue in terms of when you were deciding when to go in. And of course, it's also one of the most painful things as a parent. Anytime you feel like you're causing your child suffering, even if it's in a good cause, there's really almost nothing worse.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because one of our primary doctor at the NIH, when we were talking about a transplant initially, said probably best to wait between something between 3 and 4. One of the reasons is because by that point, most patients are verbal enough that they can tell you, my stomach hurts. They can tell you, I'm.
Which can be the difference between life and death in this case.
Absolutely. Another thing, which is a little bit technical, is that if the smaller the patient is, the more microscopically delicate is the question of dosing, right? When you're talking about something like a chemotherapy drug, which is highly toxic, you sure as heck better get the right dosage per kilogram, because if you overdose the patient, that's basically a recipe for serious liver damage or other organ damage.
Yeah. And so he was able, by the time he got in there, he was able to talk, he could communicate. And I mean, he's a great kid, but I mean, this is just a lot for anyone to bear. I mean, did you learn anything about your son? I mean, you spend more intense time with him than probably you ever did before or ever will again, or that most people will again. I mean,
yeah.
How did he possibly cope with the kind of pain and anxiety? I mean, do you feel like did he really know what was going on?
So he was really into toy trains, right? And he had these kind of battery-powered locomotives that he played with all the time. And so Felicia kind of explained to him that just like the trains need to get battery transplants to function, he was going to need to get new blood cells transplanted to function. And she, there's books that she read and I skimmed about how to kind of talk to your kids about this. And one of the things she did was kind of art therapy. They drew kind of almost kind of a graphic novel with different, stages of the process represented, and, bad old cells going out and new old cells coming in. So to the degree that he understood, he kind of rolled with it. On the one hand, I have to say he didn't like being imprisoned in there, but he loved the attention, and he loved having mommy and daddy all to himself without any kind of distractions. And he really liked the food. One of the things that kind of surprised me is that when you go into an immunocompromised state and you go into a pediatric bone marrow transplant unit, a lot of the foods that we consider healthy and nutritious and optimal are actually considered must to avoid. So, vegetables and fruits and, most milk, anything that could remotely be a source of foodborne illness has to be avoided.
Yeah, so processed, packaged in 3 layers of plastic.
Yeah, exactly. So
microwave.
Here comes the Velveeta slices. Here comes the Cheetos. Here comes the soda. Here comes cookies. Anything that is completely processed and laden with preservatives, but is a source of calories, gets the thumbs up. So he was basically gorging on junk food and candy for months, and he got into that.
Yeah. And how old is he now?
He's 8. He's going to turn 9 on May 1st. We're excited about that.
Excellent. Let's see. Other questions? Well, just, you talked about turning the lens on yourself. Mm-hmm. How did Felicia feel about that?
About me turning the lens on myself, or about her representation of the book?
About turning the lens on yourself, and frankly, all of you. I mean, it was it's a family memoir.
It is. I mean, she read the book. She, she wasn't surprised by the book, but it's probably fair to say that it's not the book she would have written, because we're different people and we have different experiences. And she was there for certain things that I missed, and I was there for certain things that she missed.
And you had to interview her. You had to interview her for the post talk as well.
Yeah, several times. I mean, we're still first of all, we're still dealing with this, right? Not just the book part of it. This is still, Sebastian's totally cured. I can report, his blood cell counts are exactly where they should be. That part's done, but there's plenty of other parts that we're still negotiating on a daily basis. So, it's not like, I still tell you, I'm still very much in kind of the before picture of the diet ad more than the after picture. So, we don't feel that that it's all over for us. In fact, funny story, when I first sent out the book proposal, one of the editors who rejected it said, they're actually very nice when they reject it. They tell you why they're rejecting it. They said, by the way, it seems that Miguel is still kind of coping with this and still kind of dealing with this experience. To which my response was, yeah, guilty as charged. Absolutely. So we're still kind of dealing with, that part of it. And post-traumatic stress disorder is a very special, there's a clear definition for that. I don't think that applies to us necessarily, but something like it applies to us. And then you have this added thing where there's suddenly, 90,000 words about the most intimate parts of your life out there, and you can't change any of it, and you certainly can't color how people are going to interpret it. So there's that layer of it too. But again, it wasn't that we thought we were important or we find ourselves that fascinating, but the process, the experience was important. That I feel quite profoundly to be true. The experience was important. And I don't necessarily consider myself a great writer. I'm not sure the first caveman who drew an ox on a cave wall thought he was a great writer, but he thought that it was worth documenting, and that was kind of my motivation.
Well, I'll pimp it again and say, I think what you are is a wonderful storyteller, and it's you sort of got to the heart of these moments of fear and joy and hope and sort of you have the reader wondering what comes next, even if you know. So
well, we talked about this before. I'm also somebody who doesn't finish a lot of books, and I'm a TV guy, so I'm constantly I'm kind of aware of would I be entertained? Would I feel would I be motivated to turn this page or go watch more Netflix? And so, the book was written to, frankly, to entertain the reader, to keep them engaged. I mean, I think it's the author's and the book's responsibility to get the reader to the end. I don't want people to feel like it's a chore or an uphill climb the whole way to get through the text.
Yeah. I'm sort of on the uplift side. One of the questions that popped up here was, what kind of causes or activities you're involved in now that come out of this. I mean, you and Felicia have, I will say Felicia in particular has really, really taken the baton, and she's become a leader in this space and helping other families and really kind of pushing the boulder up the hill. I want you talk a little bit about what you guys are doing.
Yeah, no, she's amazing. She's become not a full-time, but certainly a part-time, advocate for the rare disease community broadly, but specifically with the patient community of our condition, which is called CGD. She's started a nonprofit called the CGD Association of America, which is working closely with the medical community and the pharmaceutical community to try to, do more research and advance the treatment options. And so I'm really, really just in awe of her and so proud of her for that. And as far as I'm concerned, I've just tried to do a little bit more volunteering. Before COVID, I was teaching a little Sunday school. I was volunteering at some food kitchens and all this, because you spend so much time worrying about your own crap and your own problems and your own suffering and, me. It's wonderfully therapeutic to just spend some time focusing on other people's problems and other people's suffering and realizing that as messed up as you might be, everybody else has their own problems, some of them much more severe, and you can do some good for both them and yourself by attending to other issues than whatever's going on in your own head or in your own navel.
Mm-hmm. So we have a few more minutes. If anyone, we're going to keep chatting for a few more minutes, and if you have more questions, hit that ask a question button. I see them lighting up like Vegas, and of course you can also hit that green button and get your copy at 10% off. I don't get a cut, I don't think, although maybe you'll buy me a drink somewhere.
Yeah. No, I mean, I tell everybody, look, I have no ambitions of being, the next Stephen King. I'm just trying to not embarrass my publisher. So, by all means, please, redeem their decision.
Yeah. Here's a question that just popped up. Have either of your kids, like especially Lydia, has she read this book?
She looked up herself in the index and read all her parts. No, there's some parts of the book that it's interesting. I mean, I feel like I should have in the introduction kind of done a choose your own adventure thing. Like, if you want the personal, emotional, inspiring stuff, go to these chapters. If you want the medical, scientific stuff, go to these chapters. So, so the kids, go to the more personal stuff. They really like the final chapter, which is in large part about our dog. So that's one of the things that they like. But
A pretty big deal, I bet, because I bet you were not allowed a dog during this the years before this transplant.
yes, which
I mean,
I thought was one of the upsides, and one of my many miscalculations was not wanting a dog, thinking that it was going to be the final straw that completely fragmented our family. The dog was going to be nothing but yelping and urine and destroyed furniture, and I was 100% wrong. The dog is a wonder, very low maintenance, wants nothing other than to give and receive love, and we all benefited by that presence in our lives.
yeah. We have a question. What do you hope Sebastian's going to take away from this book when he is able to read it or does read it?
Well, I hope it reminds him, at the very least, of all that went into making his body work, and all the many ways that the body can be broken and how hard it is to repair. With when we would drive to after the transplant, we'd have to go on a daily basis to the post-transplant children's hospital for medications and such, and we would drive into the Circle Drive, and at Duke, there's this smoking section where patients who are so addicted to nicotine that they kind of wheel themselves out to the 100-foot distance between them and the front door of the hospital and go into Marlboro country. And I just remember, look, I've smoked my fair share of cigarettes and other things in my life too. So, I think it's your body and you can put what you want in it. Nevertheless, I was hoping, and I continue to hope, that my son would, kind of see that and appreciate that a lot of people suffered and worked and contributed to make his body function, and that he has a certain degree of respect for it. And then more broadly, I also hope that he has the same experience that we had, as we kind of, one of the weird side effects of the experience for us was that we now no longer really have much tolerance for on-screen or on-camera violence, which is kind of one of the things that I think a lot of people in the culture just kind of take for granted and consume as entertainment. And for us, not to, again, be sanctimonious about it, but the idea of watching people punch each other or shoot each other, watching the human body get annihilated is really not that entertaining for us. That said, I do watch NFL football, so what can I say? Sue me.
Guilty as charged.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. It looks like I think we're getting wrapped up here. It's been wonderful to see old friends, new friends. I want to thank everyone for coming. Before we say goodbye, is there anything else, Miguel, that you would like to tell people aside from buy your book and buy 3 more and send it to all your friends for May Day?
Yeah, I mean, I don't like. I consider myself a thought follower more than a thought leader. So I would just say, enjoy the book or enjoy any book. Put the phone down and read a book.
Reading is fun. To mention.
Yeah, read anything. We could use more reading and less screen watching. But other than that, just take care of yourselves.
Yeah, really. Hey, Miguel, thank you for writing this and sharing your story. It's been a pleasure. Thanks for talking about it, and good luck with the book. Hope to see you soon once lockdown ends or whatever you call it up here.
Yeah, look at all these great comments, all these people that are that spend some time. I'm just shocked in a day when people literally have 10,000, hundreds of thousands of other things they could do with their disposable time and income that they have even just a few seconds to devote to this. So that's very humbling. No, thank you.
It's awesome.
Thank you, Caleb. Great job. Wow, I've been interviewed a number of times, and you do a great job at this.
Oh, well, no, you do a great job with this.
What can I say? I've had some practice.
So you're gonna get so we're not gonna get Sebastian with his Kate flying through from the screen left.
Yeah, I could call him down here, but I think they're eager for us to wrap it up. I should have done that a few minutes ago. Amenable to doing this on Clubhouse. So somebody just said I should do this on Clubhouse, and for our friend,
I just got an invite, so I may. I don't know anything about it.
Sample it. I mean, it feels like every 6 months there's another social media thing that you're obligated to participate in. It's funny that the publisher Penguin Random House had this authors university thing where they, bring in successful authors to tell you how to market your book. And it basically comes down to step 1, become a social media star. Step 2, write a book. Step 3, get your followers to buy your book.
Yeah, good strategy. Well,
Yeah.
we'll work on it. Clubhouse, here we come.
Yeah, exactly. Let's do it.
All right. Take care, everyone.